All right, let's take a look at Aleks lesson 2.4, number 2. It says find a polynomial f of x, a polynomial function, that's what that means right there, of degree 3 with real coefficients and the following zeros. And it just has two zeros listed, 4 and 1 plus I. There's a piece of knowledge that it expects you to know, and that's that every time you have what's called an imaginary or a complex zero, that they come in pairs. So if you have a 1 plus I, that means you're also going to have a 1 minus I. Since they're saying these are zeros, that kind of means that x equals these numbers, 4, 1 plus I, and 1 minus I. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write this in factored form. So the equation f of x in factored form would be the value to get a 0 at 4 means you comes from the factor of x minus 4. It's why we always say inside lies, because if you change this to a factor, the way you get a positive 4 to go across the equal sign is you would have to subtract 4 from both sides. And so the value lies now as a negative 4. With the next parenthesis, I know a lot of students overthink this when they see two terms, but this 1, 0, you just do the same rule. It's just going to lie. So a positive 1 is going to become a negative 1. A positive I is going to become a negative I. So it'll be x minus 1 minus I. And then the third 0, again, make both those terms lie. So it's x minus 1 plus I. Now, if you've done it correctly, when you look at your complex zeros, they should be the opposite sign on the I portion only. Everything else should be the same. X is the same, negative 1 the same. It's just the I portion. I have a negative I and a positive I. They want this in with real coefficients, which means standard form. We have to multiply this out. So what I'm going to multiply first is the imaginary portion to get rid of the i's. So I will have x times x. I'm going to list this as x minus 4. And so I have an x squared. X times negative 1 will be a negative x. And an x times I is a ix. I do alphabetical order. You don't have to do that order, but I do. And I'm going to switch colors to make this easier here for the next term. So now I'm going to distribute this portion through. So I have a negative x, negative 1x. A negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. And here I have a negative 1 times a positive I. That's a negative I. And so now, last distribution here, I have a negative ix. A negative I times a negative 1 is a positive I. And then a negative I times a positive I is a negative I squared. Now, that right there makes up this big distribution, and the i's should cancel. If I've done this correctly, the i's should cancel out. I have a positive ix right here. I have a negative ix. Those would simplify with one another. They're removed. And notice I also have a a negative I there and a positive I here. So these two get removed with one another. Now the last thing I have here is a negative I squared. So I want you to know I comes from the square root of negative 1, which means if I were to square both sides, try to get rid of a square root, I would find out that I squared equals negative 1. Or in this case, a negative I squared, I'm going to put a negative there, I would have to make this side negative, which two negatives are end up making it positive. So a negative I squared equals a positive 1. And so that's what I would do right here, is I would substitute in for this and say, okay, this is actually equal to a positive 1. So when I simplify, I'll have x minus 4 times right here x squared. I see I have a negative x and another negative x. That's going to become negative 2x's. So I have two of them. So negative 2x. Then I have a plus a 1. Whoops. Plus a 1 and another 1 right there. So I have plus 2. So now to finally get my answer, I got to distribute this through one more time. So this time I'll have here x cubed, negative 2x squared, and a positive 2x. Then a negative 4x squared. This would be a positive 8x. because a negative times a negative is a positive. And then here I'd have a -8. When I combine all my like terms, I found out that my function f of x is going to equal, I have only one x cubed, I have a -2x squared and a -4x squared. That's a -6x squared, because it's kind of like money here when you combine like terms. I owe $2, I owe someone else $4. That means I owe a total 6. For the x's, I have a positive 2x, a positive 8x, that becomes positive 10x, and then the -8. All that would be my answer right there. So that would be how you multiply with complex numbers.